without having done the groundwork. A grouping of Pacific Island nations has been unable to agree a security pact with China. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is attending a regional summit in Fiji, where Beijing's ambitions for wider security ties have caused concern. Celia Hatton has this report.
10 Pacific Island nations reached an agreement with China on the need for COVID recovery and agricultural assistance. The concerns about the implications of a far-reaching security pact with Beijing could not be overcome. The Fijian Prime Minister, Frank Bainimarama, said consensus was needed before any regional deal could be signed. Leaked details of a 5-year action plan proposed by Beijing would have given Chinese police and security forces broad access to the region.
Celia Hatton reporting. World News from the BBC. Police in southeast Nigeria are searching for the leader of the country's Methodist Church who's been kidnapped. Officers say Samuel Kanu Uche was abducted on Sunday in Abia State. It isn't clear who carried out the attack, but separatist groups are active in the area. The Taliban have described a United Nations report on the presence of foreign militant groups in Afghanistan as baseless. The document by the UN Security Council monitoring group accuses Afghanistan of harboring extremist organizations such as Al-Qaeda. The government in the Indian state of Punjab has promised to spare no effort in the investigation into the murder of a popular singer and politician. Shubdeep Singh Sidhu, known as Sidhu Moosewala, was shot dead on Sunday. A day earlier, his security detail had been scaled back by the state authorities. They said they wanted to crack down on what they called the VIP culture among celebrities. Here's our South Asia correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan.
Sidhu Moosewala was described by Rolling Stone as one of the country's most forceful music experts in a generation. He was a Punjabi singer who mixed a range of genres, rap, trap and drill with his trademark vocals. And he had a huge following around the world. He collaborated with a number of artists in the UK. He was also really popular in Canada. And his YouTube channel has clocked up billions of views. So that just gives you an idea of just how popular he was.
The British government has announced that graduates from the world's top universities will be eligible for 2- and 3-year visas to work in the UK under a new scheme designed to attract what it calls the brightest and best. The new visas for so-called high-potential individuals are the latest change to the UK's visa regime since Brexit ended automatic entry for citizens of the European Union. The latest, BBC News.
Hello, it's Emily Webb here, and this is Outlook. It's the place where we introduce you to extraordinary people from around the world. Today we're in India.
हेलो सबको नमस्कार दोस्तों द कविता शो के इस एपिसोड में
This is Hassan with the Kavita Show. When it launched in 2017, it was revolutionary.
ध्यान फोन में जाता है फोन में देखते हैं कि
You see, the show's named after Kavita Bundelkhandi. Kavita is Dalit, making this the first news opinion program in history to be produced and presented by a Dalit woman. Dalits were once called untouchables, a group so discriminated against they weren't even considered to be part of India's caste system. As for Dalit women, they've been described as some of the most oppressed people in the world. And the Kavita Show isn't the only major achievement on Kavita's CV or resume. She also runs India's first all-women newsroom.
मैं खबर लहरिया की co-founder हूँ.
I am the co-founder and the editor-in-chief of Khabar Lahariya. It's the first feminist media organization in the country where all the journalists and producers are women. We have rural women, Dalit women, tribal women, Muslim women. We have women who are less educated and women from the upper caste as well.
Khabar Lahariya. Translated, it means waves of news. It's run out of Uttar Pradesh, Kavita's home state, and focuses on rural life. That can be anything from stories about jungle bandits, more on that later, to the price of lemons. They're issues that staff members have also faced. Many of its journalists were married off as children, and there are survivors of abuse and domestic violence working in the newsroom. In a media climate dominated by upper caste men, they stand out.
जो हाशिए पर रहने वाली आवाजें होती हैं उन पर हमने
Our job is to highlight the voices of people who live on the edges of society. We report with a feminist perspective and bring out voices that aren't important to the mainstream media.
Kavita not only writes and speaks about these issues, she even sings about them.
भावरा तेरा पानी
This is from a report she did about water scarcity. Normally sung by rural women, this song is about how water is more precious than anything, even a husband.
गगरी न फूटे खसम मरी जाए रे दोस्तों.
Someone who's worked their way up through the newsroom is Khabr Laharia's managing editor, Meera Devi.
मुझे एक किस्सा है जो कभी नहीं अपनी लाइफ में भूलेगा.
There's one incident that I'll never forget. It was years ago when I started working for Khabr Laharia. I'd gone to cover a story and a man asked for my identification. Back then the newspaper was our identity, a bit like a business card. So I gave him the newspaper. He took it and stamped on it. He said anybody can print a newspaper. People would make fun of us. People would insult us, but we didn't give up. And now it can be very different.
अभी जब मैं पानी की कवरेज कर रही थी तो
Recently I went to cover the water shortage problem and people said, at least someone from the media has come to our village. Hearing that made me feel proud. And now we don't even need to introduce ourselves. People recognize us. They want to share their stories with us.
Now Meera and Kavita go way back. They're both Dalits from the same area of Uttar Pradesh, and you could argue that it was their friendship and mutual support that made them both defy expectations to become two of India's most impactful journalists.
मैं मीरा से कक्षा छठी.
I first met Meera in school. I think I was coming up to 15. My education had been really disrupted and I'd missed out on a lot of schooling, so I was the oldest in the classroom. But I don't remember much else.
तुम्हें कुछ याद है मीरा पहली बार का?
Do you remember anything, Meera, from the first time we met?
Yeah, tell me, Meera, do you remember anything? And also, what were your impressions of the 14, 15-year-old Kavita?
कविता और मेरे काफी.
Kavita and I had the same interest. We both loved singing. We would sing together at school for Independence Day and Republic Day celebrations. We took part in competitions. And you know, that's what brought us together. We were really close. And when Kavita had to go and live with her husband, we all cried together.
हाँ 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 रोना हुआ था.
Yeah, so I was sent to my husband's house. Yeah.
Because you were already married, Kavita, by the time you met Meera. How old were you when you got married?
12 years. 12 साल.
I was 12 when I got married. Actually, there were lots of child marriages at the time. It was very common practice. My mother used to say that some people were married when they were still in the womb. And when she got married to my father, they were so young that they just used to play together. They didn't understand that they were husband and wife.
So in the first years of your marriage, you didn't live with your husband, you still lived with your parents. And it was actually after your marriage that you managed to convince them to let you go to school. How did you do that? Because I hear that you put up quite a fight.
जी. कोई पढ़ा लिखा उस समय था नहीं, यहाँ तक कि मेरे गाँव में.
Yes. No one in my family or village was educated. My family were all farmers and educating girls seemed like a crime. So one day I was out with animals from our farm when I noticed this women's education center where girls were taking lessons. So I was very curious, and when I was peeping through the window, the teacher saw me. She told me to come inside and she asked me what my name was. So I said my name was Kavita. And then she said, can you write your name? And I said, no, I can't do that, but I want to learn. She said she would teach me. So when I went home, I told my parents that I wanted to study. They were really surprised and they said, you're now married, so it's better for you to learn to cook, take care of children, take care of the cattle, and learn how to be a farmer's wife. But I didn't drop it. My father was initially against it, as he was worried how I would be perceived because I was married. He was also worried about money, how to pay for simple things like books and pencils. There was also a lot of false gossip about what goes on in the school, and some people said they would sold girls and other things like that. But I still managed to convince my father. And eventually he sold his land so that my sisters and I could go to school.
What were the first things that you learned when you showed up at this education center?
तो शुरुआत वहाँ पर सबसे पहले मैंने अपना नाम
So when I started going to the center, the first thing I learned was how to write my name. I would practice it every day, even when I wasn't at school. If I was making rotis on the stove, I would draw out my name on the flour, or I would write it in the soil if I was working in the field. And after I learned how to write my name, I learned how to write my father's name, my mother's name, my brothers and sisters, even my village name. It was wonderful, and this is how I progressed. A girl who could not write her name and now runs a newsroom.
Mira's own route to education was also convoluted. She was at school, but she had a lot of other responsibilities to contend with. So Mira, as for you, when you were at school, I mean, not only were you married, but you also had your first daughter when you were studying. How did you make that work with your school day?
हाँ मेरी बेटी छोटी थी और
Yes, my daughter was very young. My school was around 250 meters away from the house, and the class was on the second floor. So I could see my home from there. My grandmother looked after my daughter, and sometimes she would shout from the house saying, "Come, feed the baby. Come, your baby is crying." And people in my class used to make a lot of jokes because my grandmother was yelling across the road for me to come and look after the baby. It was hard, but my grandmother gave me all the support I needed.
Obviously, you were trying to balance these two things, sort of having a young daughter and also going to school. Why did it feel so important to you to be getting that education?
पढ़ाई के लिए ही तो मैं लड़ाई लड़ रही थी.
Education is what I fought for. I don't know what I wanted to do with my education. I just knew that I wanted to study. When I got married, I only went to my in-laws' place in summer holidays. Rest of the time, I lived with my parents and studied. But when I was a little bit older, still in school, I started spending more time at my in-laws, and that's how I ended up being pregnant. But despite having my daughter, I kept studying, even though it caused some arguments between my in-laws and my own family. My in-laws would say, "Why did you get her married if you wanted to keep her at home?" But my mother was very supportive. She stood up for me.
That determination to get your education sounds like something you both shared. You were both really fighting to make sure it happened. Mira, were you supporting each other? Were you and Kavita supporting each other to ensure that did happen?
हाँ इसके लिए बहुत हमने काम किया है कि
Yes,
जब मैंने
this is something we worked hard for. I was very good at school. I was top of my class, and I was very competitive as well. But I never competed with Kavita. I only wanted to support her. Kavita started school much later, and I was worried she'd fall behind because she had to leave every now and then to stay with her husband.
खेती के काम के साथ साथ में मैंने पढ़ाई लिखाई की थी.
And I also worked at the farm while I was at school. Even when I had exams, I used to first work in the fields, then walk miles to go to school.
जैसे ही हाई स्कूल के बोर्ड पेपर आ गए थे.
So when we were taking a high school exam, I told Kavita to come and stay at my house. That way it was easier for her to get to school because it was closer. We used to study all night. To help us stay awake, we used to put this sort of cooling oil in our eyes. There was no electricity in our house, so we used to use a kerosene lamp to study. And when we went for a shower in the morning, we were all covered in soot. When we went to give our high school exam, we ended up sitting in the same room. And there were times I tried to help Kavita with some questions.
रिजल्ट कैंसिल हो जाए वाला. रिजल्ट कैंसिल कर दी वाला सरकार.
My result will get cancelled. Don't expose me.
We're exposing you today. The lengths that you went to, both of you were studying so hard, just trying to pass your exams, reach the next stage. Kavita, how do you think your ambitions were different to the expectations of the people that you had around you? Like, what were the expectations of you as a Dalit woman or a Dalit teenager, perhaps?
लोगों के मन में ये नहीं था कि मैं कुछ बनूं.
Nobody expected that I would make anything of myself. There was no one around me who thought I could be a professional working woman. And I was also very aware of the discrimination faced by Dalits. My parents experienced it, and it was everywhere, even in school. I remember a teacher once said, like the Indian dhol drum, people from the lower caste, animals and women all deserve to be beaten. That really made me angry.
When people would say that to you as a teenager, how would you respond, Kavita?
इतना लोग मजाक उड़ाते उड़ाते
I can't tell you how much people ridiculed me, but I would stand up for myself. Society is set up for Dalits to fail, and it made me think about my rights and my community's rights. I remember reading about Bhimrao Ambedkar. He was the man who was the architect of the Indian Constitution, and he was a Dalit. He said, we are all equal before the law. And when I found that out, this started a passion in me to do what is right. I had no idea where this passion would take me, but I knew I wanted to do something. People would still ask me. They'd say, oh, you've become a politician. I will just start a revolution.
But in spite of the taunts, Kavita did want to create change. The same NGO who'd helped her get an education offered her the chance to work on a community newsletter. It was a place for newly literate women to keep learning.
महिला डाकिया निकलता था
I got involved with Mahila Dakia, and I used to write and draw for it. It was a place for Dalit women to share their stories about their lives.
You might call it a predecessor to Kabbalah Haria. In other words, it was radical.
जो महिलाएं होती हैं वो भी क्योंकि उनको पेपर पढ़ना ही अलाउ है
Women didn't have access to newspapers. It was generally something for men. And because we came from a village, the newspaper wouldn't come to people's homes either, but to a community area where usually upper caste men gathered to read it.
Soon, the NGO thought, why settle with a newsletter? And Kabbalah Haria was born. What started as a single-sheet newspaper was soon being read in 400 villages across the state. And Kavita's reporting career was launched.
मैंने कभी नहीं सुना था कि पत्रकार क्या होता है अगर सुना
I had never heard the word journalist or journalism. I knew what a newspaper was, but how it was produced, I had no idea. So I began my training as a journalist while I was working at Khabar Lahariya. I employed a lot of Dalit women who were in school with me, who had dropped out. They're bright women who didn't have the chance to get a basic education. So I got them involved and encouraged them to finish school as well. People would say to me, Dalits shouldn't be getting educated. Why are you trying to change history? Your forefathers were bonded laborers working in other people's fields. Do you really think you can be a journalist?
असल में बहुत चुनौती रही है इस काम को इस खातिर
The truth is, it's been a huge challenge for us to establish Khabar Lahariya. At first, people refused to recognize us as journalists, as female journalists. They used to say women cannot be journalists. Journalism is a man's domain. So when we stepped into that world, we became a challenge for society. A woman looking directly into a man's eye and asking tough questions is not what normally happens in Bundelkhand, or not even happens in India. People would refuse to give us interviews, but we persisted. We said we are female journalists, we will ask questions and we will expose the problems affecting your lives.
तो इसमें अपनी जगह हमने बनाया
So we carved a space for ourselves, arguing and facing all sorts of challenges. We started reporting stories that nobody else covered. We went into remote tribal areas and even areas overrun by bandits where other media organizations were too scared to go. And when we covered one issue, we discovered many other things that even big government officials weren't even aware of. And then people started seeing results from our reporting, like roads getting built, water coming, the electricity situation improving, people getting food vouchers. Gradually, people started respecting us as journalists.
So Mira, you ended up joining Kabbalah Haria a little later as a reporter. When do you think you began to realize the impact your reporting was having in the local community?
मुझे याद है एक बारी की बात है कि प्रशासन गई थी किसी काम के लिए तो जब मैं
I remember one time I gone to a government office for some work and I met a man there who had come with a complaint. I noticed that attached to his document was a cutting from Khabar Lahariya newspaper. And I asked him about the clipping. He said it was proof of the problem in his village. That was the moment I realized the power of my work and the power of Khabar Lahariya.
That must have been a very satisfying moment.
बहुत अच्छा लगा, बहुत गर्व की बात लगी थी कि देखिए तो आज
It felt really good. I was so proud when I saw the clipping. I couldn't believe my eyes that our work was being used as evidence. This was our reward.
Khabar Lahariya's work went from local to national when they ran an investigation of a huge illegal mining racket. As for Kavita, she made her mark through her reporting on bandits.
प्रॉब्लम यहाँ बहुत रही है, डकैत क्या होता है?
It is a big problem in our area. Bandits are everywhere. I mean, let me tell you who a bandit is. A bandit is a person who picks up a gun either because they were upset about something or are seeking revenge. So they hide away in the jungle, get a gang together, and then they go around looting, kidnapping women and killing people. They come asking for food from people who don't have enough for themselves. They sometimes meddle in elections and put pressure on politicians and voters. People used to live in fear of bandits. Bandits affected the lives of so many, so I did a series on them, focusing on the families they left behind. We met their mothers and wives to find out how they were surviving. It was hard because everyone is terrified of bandits. Nobody wants to go near them.
And this gives you a sense of how daring a lot of Khabar Lahariya's work is. Often Kavita would travel alone using public transport to get to an interview. She'd then be face to face with a powerful local criminal.
जब मैं पहली बार रिपोर्टिंग करने गई, एक डाकू थे और
The first report I did was about a bandit whose wife had become a village chief, and so I went to interview the wife. They lived in the middle of the jungle, so it was very difficult to get to. And I was so scared, as if the ground beneath my feet was slipping away. She was the village head and wife of this bandit. This woman was misappropriating funds in the community, so I was asking her some tough questions. It was very scary. I was so worried about suddenly being attacked. I was worried that somebody might come and snatch our camera. But luckily it all went well.
बहुत strong भी हुआ कि डर के जो अंदर
It was both a good and scary experience, I would say. It helped lose all the fear I had in me.
How are you in those more high adrenaline reporting situations, Mira?
डर ऐसी चीज है ना कि वो तो सब कुछ है.
Fear is something that affects everyone. I feel scared too. But there's also an excitement in reporting on a story that's different. There was this one time Kavita and I went to report on the inauguration of a temple that was built to celebrate the life of a famous bandit. There were statues of both the bandit and his wife in the temple, and they would be worshipped like gods. A lot of powerful people had come to celebrate this. Politicians, administrators, people in local governance. It was a feast. But we went there to question people. Why did they want to worship the bandit?
विधायक भी थे, डीएम भी थे, तो सबका सपोर्ट था, लेकिन हमारा
There were a lot of politicians and government officials who had come to support the temple. And no one was questioning anything while we were there to challenge the very existence of temple for a man who was really violent and had killed a lot of people in our area and was supposed to be questioned.
जब हम ये रिपोर्टिंग करने गए तो
We were standing outside the temple wondering how to frame our questions. Wondering even if we should risk going inside. We were really scared.
हमें लग रहा था कि कहीं उसका बेटा या कहीं
We were worried that the bandit's son or his gang might be hiding inside. We'd also heard that there were weapons hidden inside the temple. We were worried about being surrounded and attacked. It was really scary, but we did go inside. We went all the way to the top of the temple. We even took pictures.
Kavita, have you ever received a death threat because of your work?
बहुत हेल्पफुल.
Yeah, I've received a lot of threats. We got a lot of threats and abusive letters when we initially started the newspaper. When we've reported on caste-related issues and caste-based violence, many times people from the upper caste abused us and threatened with guns I mean, we didn't always have resources, these kind of transportation facilities, and we used to go on foot to places and used to walk to our stories, to cover our stories. And there have been incidents where people surrounded us and took out their pistols, their guns, and they threatened us. But we continued with our work. We didn't resort to abuse for abuse or guns for guns. We showed a lot of patience. Once even we got a notice that Khabar Leheria was being closed down, but we fought that.
हम अभी ये ट्रोलिंग में आ गया जब ये चीजें ऑनलाइन हो गया.
Now that we're digital, the abuse has taken the form of online trolling. It happens all the time, but when our work makes a difference, the same people who were threatening us, even with pistols and guns, come back to praise us and honor us. It was a struggle before and it is still a struggle now. The only difference is we're established and have been confident. We have worked with honesty. We think if there's truth in our stories, people will support us.
We're taking a short break, but we're back in part 2 as Kavita gets recognition from India's media elite. This is Outlook.
Now on the BBC World Service, today's BBC Minute update on the coronavirus. It's Ria and Tom.
First to China, where authorities in Shanghai have announced that some lockdown measures imposed on businesses will be lifted from Wednesday. The country's commercial hub has been under a strict lockdown for almost 2 months.
Meanwhile, the capital Beijing has reopened parts of its public transport system as infections ease there.
Next to neighbouring North Korea, a strict lockdown in the capital Pyongyang has reportedly now been eased. It is quite difficult to get accurate, independent information from the secretive state.
Turkey has lifted its mask mandate for public transport. It means hospitals are now the only places where face coverings must be worn.
Over to Africa, where Kenya's President Kenyatta has urged people there to remain cautious to the threat from COVID, despite the relaxation of restrictions.
He also stressed that getting vaccinated is the best way of ensuring the country can move on from the pandemic.
Lots more, including some useful explainers. Head online to bbc.com/coronavirus.
BBC Minute. Next on Outlook, more from the journalists behind India's first all-women newsroom and the bar in Chicago that was owned and staffed by undercover reporters.
I remember at one point an older tipper just looked up and announced to everyone in there, I finally figured it out. This place is a front for I don't know, it's gotta be a front for something.
They wanted to expose corruption, but would their cover get blown? We'll back after this.
BBC News with Mara Alderson. The governor of Ukraine to a transcription says Russian forces are making the center of Donetsk, the easternmost city still in Ukrainian hands. Sergei Haidai describes the situation as very difficult. Russia is using huge artillery bombardments to try to capture the city. Diplomats in Brussels say European Union ambassadors have again failed to reach an agreement on banning imports of oil from Russia. Hungary, which relies heavily on Russian energy supplies, is the main opponent of a ban. A grouping of Pacific Island countries has been unable to agree a security pact with China, despite the Chinese foreign minister telling them not to be anxious about Beijing's intentions. Wang Yi is attending a regional summit in Fiji. Its prime minister said broad agreement would be needed before any new deal. Police in southeast Nigeria are searching for the leader of the country's Methodist church who has been kidnapped. Officers say Samuel Kanu Uche was abducted on Sunday in Abia State, along with 2 other clerics. Separatist groups are active in the area. The Taliban have described a United Nations report on foreign militant groups in Afghanistan as baseless. The document accuses the country of harboring extremist organisations such as Al-Qaeda. The British government announced graduates from the world's top universities will be eligible for 2- and 3-year visas to work in the UK. It's the latest change to the visa regime since Brexit ended automatic entry for EU citizens. A man disguised as an elderly woman has attacked possibly the world's most famous painting, the Mona Lisa, at the Louvre Museum in Paris. The man jumped out of a wheelchair and tried to smash the portrait's protective screen, smearing the glass with cake. Witnesses say it appeared to be a climate-related publicity stunt. BBC News.
Hello, it's Emily Webb here, and today on Outlook I'm speaking to 2 women shaking up India's journalism scene. Khabar Leheria is India's first all-female newsroom. Based in the state of Uttar Pradesh, many of the stories they cover are about marginalized communities, issues its staff are all too familiar with. Kavita Bundelkhandi is the editor-in-chief, and earlier in the program told me about the discrimination she faced as a Dalit woman, a group once referred to as untouchables. That's also true for Khabar Laharia's managing editor Meera Devi, and both women were married off as children. The women who run the paper have faced angry mobs and even death threats for their reporting, and it's taken grit and determination to get to where they are. Kavita, it sounds like you have to be very resilient to stand up to the pressure, to be able to do your job. Have you always been that way, or is that something that you've had to learn over the years, would you say?
I was not always like this. I used to be really scared. Words would get stuck in my mouth. I would struggle to speak. But over the years, I've gained a lot of confidence through training and learning new skills. Also hearing other people's stories and their struggles gave me confidence.
And I imagine one of those moments must have been when you were appointed as editor of Khabar Laharia, and you became the first Dalit woman to be appointed to India's Editors Guild. I mean, what a moment for you and for your career. How was it for you?
मुझे बहुत अच्छा लग रहा था
I was very happy. Obviously, it was a big moment for me. At the same time, I was also questioning why no Dalit woman had ever been included in the guild. Why am I the first one? The question is not just for the Editors Guild, but for all media organizations. Why don't they have more women from rural areas and the Dalit community talking about their lives and the issues that affect them?
Kavita, there's something that Meera said earlier about when you were in school and when you were facing those similar challenges. And you were both very ambitious. And Meera said that she didn't see you as competition, but she just wanted to support you. Do you think that's the environment that you have tried to create in your newsroom?
मुझे लगता है ये एक ताकत ही है जो कि सीखने और
I think our biggest strength is to teach and learn from each other and to always stay positive. That's the culture we have instilled in our team as well. Some of the women who joined us were very literate. They could gather news, but they didn't know how to put together a news story. They got educated while they were working with us. Our whole journey has been about supporting each other.
Kavita, you told me about when you were young and living in the village, how these newspapers were not read by women. They were only really read by educated men. And Khabar Laharia, like so many other news organizations, has gone digital. And I checked it out this morning. I think you have over 500,000 subscribers. Literacy is still a big issue in the communities that you're serving. But being able to make videos instead of a newspaper, does that open up your content to a wider audience, to people who historically might not have had access to news?
मुझे लगा बहुत बड़ा फर्क आया है ऑडियंस
I think it has made a huge difference. We started a newspaper and our reach was limited to our region, but since we became digital, we expanded so much. More people are able to follow our work, which means we're connecting with more people. We're working with people from different backgrounds, beliefs, different life experiences. That makes us different from any media organization operating in India today.
चमल अकादमी की शुरुआत
We've also launched an online academy to train young women and girls in journalism. We're teaching them how to make short films, how to handle equipment. This is our new venture.
The work being done by these women attracted the attention of a documentary crew, and in March 2022, a film featuring Kavita and Meera called Writing with Fire was nominated for an Oscar. Kavita thinks this is when her children finally noticed that she was something of a pioneer.
क्योंकि 2 साल से घर में है तो मम्मी कितना
The last 2 years because of COVID, we've been at home and seen the kind of attention we have gotten from around the world. People come to interview me and my kids often say, Mummy, you're such a simple person at home. And this is the lovely things that people say about you. And my son says, Mummy, you have traveled in a plane. Will I get to do the same one day? My daughter often feels confused. And she says, do you think I should go to a journalism school? I told her that she is free to choose her path. She could be a journalist a doctor or star of a family. She can be anything she wants.
I'm thinking back to when you were a teenager, Kavita, and when people used to make fun of you and say, oh, you want to start a revolution because you were so determined to get your education. Do you think that Kavita, teenage Kavita, could have imagined the sort of life that you've gone on to lead?
नहीं मैंने सोचा ये नहीं था कि
I had never thought I would be where I am today. But you know how passion works? You feel that you want to question injustice in society. You want to change what many of us consider our fate, our lives, and you want to do it no matter how. Rural people don't have mechanism to articulate their voice or their concerns. It's very frustrating to have a life like that, you know? And you feel frustrated when you know what is right and what is wrong. Those who don't even know it, they think it's in their fate to live that life. That's what God has planned for them. But that is not true. And this was the driving force for me, and that is what I wanted to do with Khabar Leheria, fight injustice. When we started Khabar Leheria, we never imagined it would be around for 20 years and still growing. I used to say that I want the flag for Khabar Leheria to fly all over India. I want to see it become digital, and all my dreams came true. This year we are celebrating 20 years of Khabar Leheria and talking to all of you about it.
आप सबसे बात कर रहे हैं
Journalists Kavita Bundelkhandi and Meera Devi speaking to me from their homes in Uttar Pradesh. And if you want to see a short film about their work, just go to bbcworldservice.com/outlook. You're listening to Outlook from the BBC World Service. Today, going behind the scenes with some intrepid reporters. This next story kicks off in Chicago in the mid-1970s. For years, it had a reputation as one of the most corrupt cities in the United States. And so a local journalist came up with a daring and pretty unorthodox plan to expose what was going on. Her idea was to get her newspaper, the Chicago Sun-Times, to buy a bar, run it as a business, staff it with undercover reporters and photographers, and document every time an official asked for a bribe. It was a scheme that caused a stir. In 2018, Joe Pigeon spoke to two of the journalists involved, the now late Zay Smith and Pam Zeckman, who came up with the idea.
Well, it started with calls that we got at the newspaper from people that were saying that they were the subject of systemic corruption on the part of inspectors coming into their establishments, demanding payoffs routinely, and they were sick and tired of it, and they wanted something done about it, but they were not willing to go on the record and complain about it for fear of losing their license or some sort of other retribution on the part of the city. Enough of those kind of complaints came in that we thought that it would be perhaps the only way to do the story was to go into business ourselves, become a bar owner, and see what happens.
How did you get involved, Zay?
I was just a young pup reporter on Cityside. Stu Lurie, the managing editor, and Joe Riley, the metropolitan, called me in at 9 o'clock on an evening when I was working late. The first question I was asked when I was brought in was, have you ever waited tables? Then they started asking me questions, and I started just saying yes, because it sounded good. Was I good talking with people? Could I otherwise keep my mouth shut? Could I write 50,000 words in a big hurry? I said yes, 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 yes.
You just said yes to anything, right?
Well, yes, and then finally Stu Lurie said, all right, you're leaving here tonight, paychecks in the mail, don't come back to this area, you just have to drop out of sight.
Were you just excited or a tiny bit nervous at that point?
Both. It sounded like an adventure.
The first thing you had to do was find a bar to buy. You found one that was called the Firehouse at the time. Why that bar?
It was a bar that had almost everything wrong with it. We had a lot of plumbing issues. The basement had maggots. It had fire issues. All of those things made for what we were looking for. We wanted a bar that had violations because the test was, would the inspectors cite us for these or give us a pass? And if so, what was the cost of giving us a pass? It also offered a possibility of
making a location where cameramen could be hidden. There was a loft that you could get up to with a vent where you could look down and be able to shoot pictures of what was going on.
They renamed it the Mirage. It seemed a good joke. And set about decorating it like any other Chicago dinosaur.
Hey, Mr. Button! Give me a little fruit.
This wasn't a dry cleaning. This is a tavern. And a tavern is the city come in off the street in need of a drink. So I was in charge of getting to know all the various unusual customers that this tavern, as any tavern, would have.
What kind of people were they?
Well, they ran the gamut from Cheeky the gun runner, who just came in one day with a gun he wanted to sell, to one of my favorites, who was the pinball wizard, who was a nice young man who worked in a camera store. It became rather of a saga over a period of weeks, him coming in every night to play the Evel Knievel machine until he could beat it.
There was the couple that always amused me that came in around 11 o'clock one morning and sat at the bar and ordered 2 margaritas. And I had no idea how to make a margarita. They wound up guiding me, and they took pity on me, and they told me what I needed to put into the drink so that it had some semblance of a margarita.
The cover was that we were just a few young people who really wanted to run a tavern, didn't know what we were doing. And there's a lot of taverns like that in Chicago.
What was the first indication that you got that you were onto something, that you were going to get access to corrupt officials, that you were going to see what was really going on behind the scenes?
When we went to inquire about this bar that was for sale, and the business broker on the bar was a man named Mr. Barish, who wound up being described in our story as Mr. Fix-It. He was a district attorney who also was an accountant. He was a true character in terms of how open he was, talking about bribing inspectors, skimming what you make for taxes to save money. It became perfectly clear that he was going to be our introduction into all of this. He bragged about it. He bragged about his connections with city inspectors. He would contact them and let them know. The inspectors would be picking up envelopes of cash at the bar that he instructed us to just leave on the bar, and they would take it and they would give us a pass. We had one inspector after another, city, county, state inspectors come in with their hands out for money, living up to the Chicago slogan that's most often used by columnist Mike Royko here, "Where's mine?" They wanted money to avoid getting us in trouble. We had state liquor inspectors actually wound up, in effect, directing us to get cash out of the cash register to pay them off.
How did you get photographic evidence of what was going on?
Well, we had the loft. We put in a fake vent that the photographer could shoot through. And we brought on 2 wonderful photographers, Gene Pesic and Jim Frost, who would spend hours in that loft.
How do you get a photographer into a bar and into that loft and shooting for a vent without being spotted?
Well, they came up with a plan to dress up as if they were workmen with toolkits. We had one near miss, a close call with the health inspector, who decided for some reason that he was going to go up in that loft, and he started to go for the ladders, and there was a mad scramble because he would have seen the camera. It was on a tripod up in the loft, and I was stalling, and we had somebody say, "Wait a minute, don't turn the light on because you might blow a fuse." And we had to stall while the cameraman said, "Well, I think I have a flashlight up there. Let me go up and get my flashlight." And he rummaged around in the attic looking for a flashlight, supposedly, but what he was really doing was dismantling his camera so that the inspector wouldn't see it, and then found a flashlight and said, here it is, and let the inspector come on up and look around. Now, if we hadn't done all that, we would have been found out. It was very, very scary.
I remember at one point an older Templar just looked up and announced to no one and everyone in particular, I finally figured it out. This place is up front for the syndicate. I don't know, it's gotta be up front for something.
They did get away with it, and after 2 months or so of 18-hour days serving customers and meticulously recording their encounters with corrupt city officials, the Mirage closed its doors. A couple of months later, from January 1978, a series of 25 articles was published detailing the evidence they had found. It had a tremendous impact.
We did have a number of inspectors that were suspended or fired. We had some criminal indictments. The really broader look at this was they created all kinds of new reforms within the city in terms of inspections. The result of that was millions and millions of dollars in additional revenue for the state. This was, and it's been described as one of the major undercover investigations done in the country, because we were taking a tradition of undercover reporting that's been done in Chicago for decades, one step further. I'm proud to say that after about a month of being open, we were becoming self-supporting, which was sort of fun.
You were actually running a bar well.
Yes, we were. It was something that perhaps Field Enterprises could have kept open and made some money from.
Do you both remember how to make a margarita?
No.
I couldn't do it today.
Pam Zeckman, narrator Dave Smith, was speaking to Joe Fidgen in 2018. Well, that is all from us today. You've been listening to Outlook from the BBC World Service. I'm Emily Webb. From me and the whole team, goodbye.
BBC World Service, and now witness history. Today we're going back 50 years to an attack on Lod Airport near Tel Aviv, in which more than 20 people were killed. This report from Simon Watts was first broadcast in 2011, and a warning that listeners may find some of the details of the attack distressing.
It's May the 30th, 1972, and a team of gunmen launch an attack at Israel's main airport. They are Japanese left-wing extremists working for a Palestinian organization.
The three men apparently arrived at Tel Aviv airport on an Air France plane. Eyewitnesses say the men waited with the other passengers at the luggage conveyor belt inside the customs hall. When their luggage arrived, they took Kalashnikov automatic rifles and hand grenades from their suitcases and opened fire indiscriminately at everyone in their vicinity.
Ros Sloboda, a British woman living in Israel, had just reached the airport. Then 23, she'd gone with a friend to meet a plane arriving from the UK.
The flight from London that our friend was on was announced as approaching, so we got up to move towards the arrivals hall. And in those days, the place where people stood to meet those who had arrived was separated from the actual arrivals hall where the luggage came in on the carousel simply by huge panes of glass. Suddenly, I heard a banging sound. We all looked at each other thinking, what is this noise? And suddenly, these huge panes of glass shattered. They came cascading down, and I watched them. And I remember thinking, this looks just like rain. It looks like raindrops. And then people started falling to the floor. And there is blood everywhere. It's everywhere, very quickly. And it suddenly occurred to me that this was something so awful. People trying to kill us. I turned to run, and as I turned, this huge hole appeared in the back of my thigh, and I realized I had been shot. I ran and I went to hide under a chair. And you know what chairs are like at airports? They're really low. I have no idea how I got under there. It must have been adrenaline, I suppose. You're talking about something that is utterly terrifying. When you think you're going to lose your life, not because you're terminally ill, but because you have gone to an airport, something as innocuous as an airport, and there are 3 men, in this case, armed with machine guns and hand grenades. They don't know anything about it. They're trying to kill you. They're trying to kill all of us. And I remember thinking, oh God, I could die here. Supposing I die, I kept saying that to myself. And I saw a picture in my mind of my house in London, my family. And then it seemed to go on forever. And I thought, when will this stop? Any minute now I was waiting for the next bullet to hit me. I was just waiting for it. And then it was over. Clearly it was over, because there was a kind of eerie quiet. And then there was a soldier standing next to me. I remember that because I couldn't get out of this chair. I was stuck. He pulled me out. And I remember smelling cordite, and the man next to me was dead, and he had no face. His face had been blown off, and his head was resting in his wife's lap. I know it was his wife. And she looked at me, and I looked at her, just a look of utter incomprehension. And I felt she was thinking, if you'd been standing here, you would have been dead, and if my husband was standing where you were, he would have been alive. And then I started running around the airport like a clockwork mouse. I really think that's a good description, because I was going off in all directions and I had no pain at all. I felt no pain at all. And I think most people who are caught up in incidents like this all say that they felt no pain. I think it's shock. I think it's the body's way of coping. Of course I must have been in pain, but I can honestly say I don't remember any pain. And I found a friend who had hid behind a pillar, and she was okay. Our first thought was, we have to get out of here. We just have to get out of here. So we went outside the terminal building and hailed a taxi. And we drove to Tel Hashemer Hospital, out just outside Tel Aviv.
More than 70 others were injured in the attack. 26 people died, many of them Puerto Rican Christians on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. In hospital, Ros Sloboda found herself next to a member of this group.
The woman next to me was Puerto Rican, and she was pregnant, clearly. She kept asking where her husband was. And the doctors were saying to each other, who met? But he's dead. And I was listening to this, and I thought, I hope she doesn't ask me anything. But of course, the doctors then left her, and she turned to me, and she said, I can't find my husband. Do you think he's all right? And she looked at me very searchingly, and I thought, what can I say to her? So I lied, and I said that it was all chaotic, and that I'm sure that, very soon she would know what had happened. And she said, oh, thank you. And then I remember I turned away so that she couldn't see my face. And I remember thinking, this is so awful.
Ros Sloboda found it difficult to stay in Israel and returned to Britain later in 1972 to be close to her relatives. She started a family of her own and had a successful career, but the attack changed her outlook on life.
Something fundamentally changed. I know the way that I think now and how I've changed. First of all, the empathy that I have for people caught up. Unfortunately, the world we live in now, there are so many people caught up in these terrible incidents. I fire off letters
to people. Sometimes have been caught up in these incidents, which I would never have done, I don't think, if I hadn't been involved myself in such an incident. The second thing is that we humans like to think we are in control of our lives. And I realised that night that we're not in control, really. And that's quite a frightening concept, I think, for a human being. So much of it is luck. And for me, it was luck in that I was standing where I was and not a couple of feet to my right. That would have been dead. And the third thing is that you never lose the feeling that something terrible could happen when you least expect it. Either to myself or people I care about. You never get over it. Every time I hear a balloon bursting or a car backfiring, I can't go anywhere where there are fireworks. I'm transported straight back there. The images are, indelibly printed in my mind, and they always will be.
In Israel, the attack led to a major overhaul of airport security. 2 of the Japanese gunmen had died during the assault. The other served 13 years before being released in a prisoner swap.
Simon Watts. That edition of Witness History was first broadcast in 2011.
This is the BBC World Service, where Alvin Hall is telling the story of a groundbreaking art show.
I'm going behind the scenes at the Baltimore Museum of Art, where a group of security guards have spent the last year curating their own exhibition.
It immediately spoke to me. I think since day one of working here, made me look at art in a whole new light.
Bars of the Arts, Tuesday at 1:30 and 8 GMT.